Hello guys, this is Paul McWhorter with TopTechBoy.com, and we are on lesson number 14 on the Arduino microcontroller. And this is really an extension of lesson 13. In lesson 13 we learned how to hook up an RGB LED and to just send simple commands to the RGB LED, just in the program to turn it different colors. One of the improvements I've made since yesterday, you were having trouble seeing the color of the LED because it was so bright it was just saturating the camera, and so it sort of just looked like bright white in each of the different colors. So what I did today is I took a ping pong ball, and basically if you drill a little hole in a ping pong ball, we have a moto tool here in the classroom, so we put a little hole in the bottom of the ping pong ball. You can come and you can just slip it over the top of the LED, and you see that's kind of bright and hard to see what it's doing, but we slip the ping pong ball over the LED and it makes just like a really pretty little lamp, and you can see what the LED is doing a lot better. What else we're going to do today is that in our code, rather than just turning red on, green on, or blue on from inside the code, the way you would really want something like this to work is you would want the user to specify what color he wanted the LED to be, and then turn to that color. So you want to start interacting with the user over the serial port. Good news is we know how to send prompts to the user on the serial port, and we know how to read his input back from the serial port. But what we're going to learn today is that based on that input that we get back from the serial port, deciding what to do based on what he input. And so there's some new programming that we're going to have to learn today. The circuit is the same that we used in lesson 13. If you're not comfortable in hooking this up, what you can do is you can go back to lesson 13. Here in lesson 14, I also include the schematic. You should be able to hook it up by just looking at this schematic in lesson 14. But if you need a little more help stepping through it, go back and watch the video and look at the resources on lesson 13, and you will have this up and running in no time. Okay. What we're going to do today, though, is that we'd like to be able to turn this LED to the color that a user inputs in the serial port. Now, one of the things to remember from our earlier lessons is that we learned how to get data from the serial port. I believe that was probably about lesson 12. We went through quite a bit of details in how to get input from a user over the serial port. Well, there's sort of three types of data that can cover, three types of variables that can cover most of our needs in the Arduino. That is having a float, having an int, or having a string. All right, a float is like the real numbers. It's all the numbers in between the round numbers. The ints are the integers. Those are the counting numbers, plus and minus, so like -5, -4, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's those round counting numbers, plus and minus, including zeros. And then the third thing is a string. A string is a string of characters, and so if you want to do things with text, you would put them in a string. And just about everything that you're going to want to do, you can do with those three types of variables, or three types of data structures. Well, today what we're going to do is we want the person to tell us what color that he wants the LED. I guess that we could do that kind of a cheesy way with ints, and we could prompt him, please input a 1 if you want it to be red, or input a 2 if you want it to be green, or input a 3 if you want it to be blue. But I think it would be better, we always want to make our programs act more like a person as opposed to making a person act like a computer. So the more natural we can make it for the person, the better the program that we've written. So I think it would be good to prompt the user for what color he would like the LED, and then to start with, he can input red or green or blue, and then we'll turn the LED and our little pretty globe that color based on what he input. Okay, but in order to do that, there's some new programming that we need to know. We're going to use the old stuff, so what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to input his color choice from the serial monitor. Well, how do we do that? We prompt him to input a color. After we prompt him, we wait for the data, and then after he inputs, then we read it. So it's those three things that we've learned in lesson 12 and lesson 12 and earlier lessons. Prompt the user for input, wait for it, and then read it once he's entered it. And so be good review for that. But there's going to be some new stuff that we are going to have to learn today, and that is that in the past there was just the void loop or the for loops or the while loops, and you just got in them and you just did them. I mean, you just did them every time. And so every time you ran the program, you just sort of ran those clauses and ran those loops. But for this case, we want to do things different based on what the person inputs. And so you don't do the same things. You have conditions, okay? And basically, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to learn how to do an if statement. And an if statement has a clause. Remember, a clause is something that starts with a curly bracket and ends with a curly bracket. And all the commands in that clause are sort of your the commands that are going to be executed. And so you can see the start here with the open curly brackets, the end here with the closed curly brackets, and all your commands you would put in that clause. Okay. Now the question though is that you don't always want to go into that clause. You only want to go into this clause if some condition is met. So this is the kind of core structure of an if statement. You say if, and then open parentheses and close parentheses, and inside those parentheses are some condition. If this condition is true, go in and execute the clause. If this condition is not true, jump over the clause and just start executing the program after the curly bracket close. So the commands inside these curly brackets are only going to be executed if this some condition is true. Notice you got to do things exactly. If is with a lowercase I. Your condition has to be inside these parentheses. And then you have to have an open curly bracket and closed curly bracket to identify that group of code that you're going to execute if the condition is true. Now, what are some of the, let's just look at a case of a conditional that you could do. Let's say that you had two variables, the variable a, and let's say a is an int, and the variable b, and let's say b is an int. And you only want to execute this clause or this group of commands if a is greater than or equal to b. Okay? In that case, your condition would look like this. If a is greater than or equal to b. If a is greater than or equal to b. So if a is 4 and b is 3, boom, you come into these curly brackets and you do all of this code. If a is not greater than or equal to b, then you don't do this code, you just jump down and do the next line of stuff. So that would be how you would compare two ints. You could say greater than or equal to. Well, let's see, there's about 6 or 7 different conditionals that you can do, and they're pretty easy to learn, but you got to be careful. First of all, you might want to say if a is equal to b. Well, the way you test if a is equal to b is a equal b, two equal signs. And this is really important, and you've got to learn this, because when I look at students' code and it's not working, one of the common mistakes I see over and over and over is they're doing a conditional with one equal sign. If you use one equal sign, Arduino thinks you're telling it, hey buddy, make a equal to b. Anytime you see one equal signs, Arduino thinks you're talking to it. You're telling them, hey you, make a equal b. That's different than testing if a equal b. If you're testing it, you're asking Arduino, hey, Arduino, is a equal b? When it's a question like that, when you're testing, you use two equal signs. So in a conditional, you would make it if a equal b, and that tests if a is equal to b. Note you must use two equal signs. The other ones are pretty easy. How about you want if a is not equal to b? Well, if a is not exclamation equal b, and so the exclamation means not. And so if you want to test for a not equal to b, you would say a exclamation equal b. This is pretty straightforward. A is less than b, a is greater than b, a is less than or equal to b, or a is greater than or equal to b. Okay, so this is something that you would use for integers or floats, and you could test kind of the size of A versus the size of B. Now, when we're doing strings, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to say if, if yellow is greater than red, you want to sort of see if it's equal. So in most of our things testing strings, we would just use equal, equal, and that would be does A equal B, and that would just say is this string the same as this string. And so that's usually the conditional that you're going to use for strings. You might also use not equal to, so you would say, test it if string A is equal string B, or if string A is not equal to string B. Those would kind of make sense. But you use these same ones for strings, ints, and floats, and for the case of strings, most of the time you're going to just be doing those too. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. So you put a conditional like this. Of course, your variables are going to be different than A and B, but this is just an example. You say if, and you put your conditional inside of these parentheses, open bracket, close curly bracket, and you can put as much code in here as you want. You can just go crazy inside this, but all that block of code's only going to be executed if this condition is true. Okay. Now there's one other little thing that you can do here that I'll go ahead and show you. You can put more than one condition. And if you're going to put more than one condition, you have to combine those conditions with an OR operator or an AND operator. So you could say if A is greater than B and if C is greater than D, you would only do it with an AND if both of them are true. If you said if A is greater than B or C is greater than D, you would execute if just one of them is true. Only one of them has to be true. So you got to understand the difference between or AND. For AND to be true, each one of the things has to be true. For OR to be true, only one needs to be true, and then it would be, the whole thing would be true. And so you probably need to go back and review AND or OR, sort of probably something that you learned in geometry class and math class. It's sort of your logical Boolean operators, but hopefully most of you would be sort of comfortable with this point from your math classes of the difference between AND and OR. Okay, and the way you do an AND in Arduino is it's the two AND symbols, and again you use AND to test for AND. Okay, and the AND would be sort of like Shift 7 on your keyboard. So if you wanted to test if A is greater than B and A is greater than C, you would say if A is greater than B and A is greater than C. Both of those would have to be true in order for you to get in here and to execute the code in between your curly brackets. Similarly, if you wanted to do OR, the OR operator is this sort of vertical bar, and you get a vertical bar above the backslash on your keyboard. It's the shift backslash. If you look for most keyboards, it's right there under the backspace key, and it's that vertical line, and you need two of them to do OR. And so for an OR, you would go boom, boom, like that. And so this then, with these greater, equal, not equal, greater, less than, and then combine that with ands and ors, you have got some pretty powerful things that you can do as far as trying to have conditional statements where the way the program unfolds depends on what a particular user input from the keyboard, or it could in the future be data that you would take actions differently based on data that you're getting from a sensor. Imagine if you had a temperature sensor, and if the temperature got above 110 degrees, you would want to turn the LED red sort of as a warning and blink it, and if it got below 40 degrees, you would want to turn it blue and blink it sort of as a warning that it's too cold or too hot. So all of a sudden you do things conditionally based on input you get from a user or input that you get from a sensor. We haven't done too much with sensors yet, and so we are going to get user input, and the user input that we are going to get is from the serial port. And so I think we are ready now to start trying to write some code on this thing. Okay, so one of the first things that we're going to need to do is we are going to need to define our variables, and so that's right now we pretty much on these simple programs been using global variables, declaring them up at the top of the program. Later on, as our programs get more complicated, we will be using local variables, which we declare down inside of a loop, and they're only valid there. But for now, we're still using global variables. Well, if you remember on this, RGB, how many pins do we need coming off of, how many pins do we have coming off of the Arduino that we need to control? 3. Okay, so we're going to need 3 variables for those pins, and so I'm going to call it int red pin. And if you remember from our schematic, we will come back over here and see if I can get you back to the schematic. Okay, if we come back and look at the schematic, remember the red was 11, the green was pin 10, and the blue was pin 6. And so this sort of needs to be the same way the circuit is. You can do it different than I did. You can use different pins, but your software has to match your circuit. And since my circuit is built, I know that the red pin is connected to pin 11. Okay, set LED pin to 11. That's the red one. Okay, and then we have int. We have a green pin, and we had that hooked up to 10. Set green LED pin to 10. Int. We have a blue pin is equal to 6. Set blue LED pin to 6. Okay, so those are our pins. What else do we need? Well, we probably need a variable for brightness, because remember, for any one of those colors, we can apply anything from 0 to 5 volts to that color to go from off to full brightness to any level of dim in between. So we probably need a variable called brightness. And for this simple one, I am just going to use one brightness. You could actually have 3 different. You could have a brightness for red, a brightness for green, and a brightness for blue, and then you could independently control each one of those. But for now, I'm just going to have, I'm going to have one brightness. It's going to be an int. And I'm going to go ahead and initialize this to full blast. So if I want it to come on full strength on my analog writes, that would be what number? 255. Okay, 255 is full on, and that corresponds to 5 volts applied. Okay, so this set brightness to full brightness. Okay, now we have our 3 pins that we're controlling. We have the variable of how bright we want the LED to be. What else are we going to need? Okay, we're going to get input from the user, and that input's going to be a string. And so when he tells us what color he wants, we've got to put that into a variable. Okay, we got to put that into a bucket. And what type of bucket does that need to be? Well, he's going to enter a word, so it needs to be a string. Okay, and you can name it whatever you want it. I like to name things that kind of make sense. So I'm going to say color choice. Okay, and it's a string, and I'm going to declare it, but I'm not going to initialize it because we'll get that from the user. Set up variable to hold user input, something like that. Okay, so now I think those are probably the variables that we're going to need. Now we need to come up in our void setup. In our void setup, we do the things that we want to do one time, and one thing that we almost always are going to want to do is turn on the serial ports. We're going to say serial.begin, and we're using 9600 these days. Doesn't really matter, just make sure it matches what your serial monitor is set to. Turn on serial port to, I didn't put 2 slashes, somebody should have spoken up. Okay, to 9600 baud. Okay, what do we need to do? We need to do our pin modes. Okay, pin mode. What's our pin? Well, it's pin 11, which is red pin. Red pin, that looks good. And what do we set it to? It's an output because we're writing to it. Okay, and I'm just going to put one comment here. Set up pin modes to output. Okay, and I'll let that be good for the next 3. Pin, don't do that. Pin mode, and then we're going to have green pin. And look at this, I made a mistake up here. That should have been an uppercase. Green pin, output, and then we have pin mode, and then we have blue pin, and it's an output, all caps. Boom. So we have done our pin modes, and this didn't turn orange, and so I see I didn't do that right. So if you watch those colors, you can find your mistakes as you're moving along. We've done our pin modes and set up our serial port. I think that is all that we are going to need to do in the setup. So we come down to the loop. Well, what do we want this program to do? We want this program to get from the user what color he wants. And so how do we get input from the user? There's three things. You prompt the user for input, you wait for the input, and then you read it in. So let's do those three things. So we want to prompt the user for input. We will do that with a serial.println. And what do we want to tell him? This is the prompt. Please input your color choice. Something like that. Okay. And then what are we doing here? We are prompting user for input. Okay. So we've asked him for the input. What do? We wait. How do we wait? We have an empty while loop that just sits in loops until data comes in. So we say, while there is no data available, just sit here and do nothing. So we say, while serial.available, open close parentheses, equals 0. So you see, this is kind of like one of those conditional tests we just talked about. Well, serial available equals 0. As long as serial available equals 0, that means there's nothing there. He hasn't inputted yet. What do? We sit there with an empty clause that does nothing. Okay. While serial available equals 0, while he has not yet input anything in, just sit here in loop and do nothing. So we wait for the data. Once it drops out of that, that means he has input the data, and so we read it in. What variable do we read it into? We already set it up, color choice. And that's going to be equal to, and we are reading a string. How do we do a string? Do you remember from a few lessons ago? We do a serial.read string. Serial capital S, read string uppercase S. Okay, open close like that. And so we're going to do the read, and so now we are going to read string from serial port. Okay, we come up here and need to put a comment here. Wait for user input. Okay. Color choices. All right, so we've read it in. We have got his color choice now. Now what do we do? Well, what we do depends on what he put in. Oh, and we better tell him what his color choices are, because it's going to be a limited group at first. Red, green, or blue, so that he doesn't put in fuchsia, because we wouldn't be looking for that and wouldn't know what to do with it. So we prompt him with what to do. So now what we do depends on what he entered. So we need an if statement. Let's say, what do we do if color choice equal, right? If color choice equal what? Red. And because we're putting this string, this is a string, not a variable, we put it in quotes. This is a variable, so we just say color choice because that's a variable. But if we want the specific string with where it's not a variable, but just specifically the word red, we put it in quotes. Okay. So if color choice equals red, what do we do? And I always close my clause right when I start it. So I open the clause, I close my clause, then I come back in here and do my business, and that way I don't forget to close it out. But what do? Well, we want to analog write. And which one do we want to write? Well, we want to analog write the red pin. And what do? Turn it to brightness, because that was the full brightness. Boom. And what do? Turn red on. Now, you don't know, this thing is going to loop, so you might have left the blue on. So you got to make sure when you get to this point, you turn the other ones off, just to be safe. So you're going to say analog write, and you're going to say blue pin, and you're going to turn it off to 0. And what does this do? Turn blue off. And similarly, log write green pin, make that 0. Turn green and off. Okay, so if he entered red, you're going to do three things. You're going to turn red on, and you're going to turn blue off, and you're going to turn green off. Okay, now we got to test and see what do we do if he entered green. Well, I don't want to retype all this, so I'm just going to copy this, and then I'm just going to kind of edit it, and I'm going to come down and say paste it. And now the if statement says if color choice is equal to, instead of red, let's make that green. And if that's green, we would want to turn red off, and we would want to turn green on. Right? Yes. And let's keep our comments looking good, so that this time that is turning that one on, and that is turning this one off. Okay. Now let's do it one more time. Boom. And we have if color choice is equal to blue. What are we going to do? We're going to turn red off, and we are going to turn blue onto brightness, which is our variable that we set up at the top, and we will turn blue on. Okay. Now, I think if we ran this program now, it would work. But one of the things that you got to see is that what if he, like many people, do not read instructions and doesn't enter red, green, or blue? Well, then you're not going to know what to do, and he's going to wonder why it's not doing what it's supposed to. So we need to test for the case if he didn't input a good value. So what would be something that is not a good value? So it would be if he did not enter red, and he did not enter green, and he did not enter blue. So if all three of those things are the case, then you need to give them a warning message and tell them to do it again. And so we need an if statement. And what this is going to be is this is going to be test for valid input. And we could get real fancy with this, but let's just keep it simple to get started. So if color choice is not equal to red, and color, that comment's going to go way on that there. Let me bring it back a little bit. If color choice is not equal to red, and color choice is not equal to green, and not that kind of and color choice is not equal to a blue, then what you're going to do. Okay, so it's only a problem. It's not a problem if it's not red by itself, because blue is a valid entry. It's not a problem if it's not green, because red is a valid choice. It's only a problem if it's not red and it's not green and it's not blue. If it's all three of those true, then you have a problem, and you need to prompt him, and you need to tell him that serial.println you are an idiot. No, we probably shouldn't do that. We should say something polite. You have not entered a valid color. Please enter red, blue, or green. Okay, that way we are nice to people. All right, so that's what. And then I'm going to put another serial.print line of just a blank. I like to put some white spaces in here, you know, just some blank lines. It makes it easier to read. And I think I'm going to put one above it as well. Okay. All right. You think it's going to run? I think it's going to run. I think that we did this good. So let's see what's going to happen here. Oh no! Oh no! What did we? Oh, you remember how I was telling you we always end our clause? I did not end that one. Okay, right. Right when you open that, you need to close it. This one is the one that closes the whole void loop. Okay, and so if I look at where does this one go with, that goes with that one. And what I'd left out is I left out this one, which goes with that one. Okay, I think it's going to run this time. Everything's green. We are holding our breath, hoping it makes it down. Ooh, let's try it one more time. Okay, it made it. So let's get our serial monitor up here. Notice that our little LED is turned off. And what's it asked me? Please input your choice of color. I think I would like to see red. Oh my goodness, look at that. It turned red, and a beautiful red indeed it is. I think I would like to see it green. Oh yes. Let's turn the lights off and see how nice that looks. Oh yeah, that's just a beautiful little LED globe. Let's try blue. Okay, let's do red again. Green. Blue. I think that is just super cool and a lot of fun, and I love the little ping pong ball on top of that. Okay, now that is really neat. And what I want you to do now for your assignment for tomorrow is I want you to come into this code, and now instead of just red, green, and blue, I want you to add more colors. The red, the green, and the blue are easy because that's just turning one pin on at a time. Remember, there's those colors that are mixes of these colors. And so I want red, green, and blue. And, ooh, let me forget one other thing. We forgot to test for the case of doing something that isn't there. So let me see if I can call that back up and do that test. Okay, what if I say pink? It says, you have not entered a valid color. Please enter red, blue, or green. Okay, and then I can come back and say green. Okay, and it goes green. So everything is working. Everybody is happy. But it's kind of boring. I mean, this thing can do any color, so I just don't want red or green or blue. What I want you to do is I want your program to do red, green, or blue. Then I want cyan, magenta, or yellow. And then I think that I would like pink, and I would like purple, and I would like orange. Okay, red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, and yellow, pink, purple, and orange. And you're going to have to get on the internet and sort of research some of those colors and see exactly what is cyan and magenta and yellow. And I want good yellows. I don't want yellows that look green or yellows that look red. I want to see a difference between yellow and orange. And I want to see a difference between pink and purple. I want to really see these in-between colors. And part of your grade is not just that everything has to work, but it's how well you match those colors and how well you really went in there and put some effort into this and got some good colors. Okay, Paul McWhorter, toptechboy.com. Hope you'll join us shortly for lesson 15. I think it will be an exciting one. Talk to you guys later.